Hello, everyone. We are live now with the SAP Online Track session about what is new in MRP. My name is Caetano Almeida. I work for SAP in North America in the Center of Expertise, where I support many of our SAP customers who are migrating to S/4HANA and who has challenges when implementing MRP. Give me- Sorry about that. I was hearing my own voice. Uh, if you join this session and you don't know what is MRP, MRP is basically material requirements planning. It's a central planning tool that is available in ECC and also in S/4HANA. I've been working with MRP for a long time, and since I work in SAP support, I work with MRP in many different releases. I started in release R3 46C. I supported customers in release 47 in the first releases of ECC. And I would say that in the first 10 years of my career, MRP was basically the same. We didn't have any major new change. We used the same transactions, the same user interface, the same everything. In 2015, SAP introduced a new release called S/4HANA that was built specifically to run on the HANA database. And since then, we had many new features in MRP. Every year there's new features coming up for MRP, and since then every new year we have to learn new things and new functionalities for MRP. So the idea behind this presentation is to go through each one of these S/4HANA releases, starting on S/4HANA 15.11, where we had simplifications, where we had the new MRP Live, and we had the new MRP Cockpit, going through S/4HANA 16.10, where we had PPDS coming and MRP supporting advanced planning materials. Going to 17.09, where we have the new MRP philosophy called DDMRP. Going through S/4HANA 18.09, where we have improvements for DDMRP. And finally, in release 19.09, we'll see the new PMRP and the additional improvements that we had for MRP, for DDMRP. And we will close with the roadmap, seeing what is planned for next releases in MRP area. There's a lot of content. I'm going a little bit faster in the first releases since it's something that is more known by many users and by many consultants who are already implementing MRP in S/4HANA. And when it comes to release 19.09, I'm going to provide some additional screens of the new PMRP and spend a little bit more time on that. So let's start with S/4HANA 15.11. S/4HANA 15.11 was the first S/4HANA release where we had some logistic features. And in S/4HANA 15.11, we had major simplifications implemented. If you're planning to go from ECC to S/4HANA or from any release to S/4HANA, even though you don't want to use any of the new features that I mentioned in the agenda, you will have to coordinate and implement these simplifications in your scenarios. What are these simplifications? They are basically old features that were a little bit limited and for which we had better alternatives to implement in ECC. So SAP decided to remove these old and very simple features from the system and use the better and improved features. Starting with the simplifications, the first one was the subcontracting scenario. In ECC, we had a very simple subcontracting scenario. Whenever you sent a stock to your vendor, it would appear in the MRP transactions in a separated stock segment. It was okay. Most of the customers were using this feature with no problems. The problem is that it was a little bit limited. You didn't have any options to define specific settings for your subcontractor level or for any option to display and to show a special procurement type or a specific lot sizing procedure. It was also limited in a third-party scenario where you need to receive your stock directly into your subcontractor stock. Back in ECC, you already had a feature called MRP areas. MRP areas is basically a new entity where you can create a special stock segment for your material. And now in S/4HANA, the MRP area is the default solution for planning subcontracting. So what happens if you're migrating to S/4HANA? You should create MRP areas for all your subcontractors. If you don't create, you will see everything together. All the subcontractor stocks will be together with your plant stocks. You will have no differentiation between what is in your plant and what has been provided to your subcontractor. So it is a recommended action from SAP to use subcontracting MRP areas. Another effect of this simplification is that you no longer need to attach the subcontracting MRP areas into your material master. For storage location planning, we have a very similar simplification. In ECC, you had the option to plan a storage location separately or to exclude it from MRP. It was a very limited feature. It means that you only had the option to use a very simple reorder point for this storage location that was separated from the plant. And what happened is that in S/4HANA, you need to use MRP areas if you need to plan a storage location separately or exclude it from MRP. SAP provided a report. It's mentioned here in this slide, MRP area storage lock migration. And this report should be executed during the migration process, during the upgrade to S/4HANA. And it will automatically convert all the storage locations that are planned separately or excluded from MRP to MRP areas. What you need to do is to create all the storage location MRP areas in advance in customizing and run the report, and the conversion will be automatically. Another simplification that had been implemented in S/4HANA is the planning file. The planning file is basically a table that marks which materials should be planned by MRP. So in ECC, we had one table, and in S/4HANA, this table was optimized for a better performance in S/4HANA. So this new table, we have less deadlocks, and we have a better performance when running MRP and reading the planning file entries. This is a minor impact for most customers. The only thing that you need to know is that you have new reports to run MRP, and you do have to run the conversion whenever you migrate to S/4HANA. So you need to run this report PPH setup MRP records when you are going to S/4HANA. This was another major simplification that happened in S/4HANA. It's called simplified sourcing. When I talk about sourcing, I'm basically talking about selecting the source of supply for both a material that is produced internally and a material that is purchased. The idea behind the simplification was to prepare the sourcing data model to match the PPDS sourcing model. As we will see, PPDS came into the S/4HANA core later in release 16.10. And with this simplification, the sourcing model of MRP is very close to the sourcing model that is available in PPDS. The major change was the source list. The source list was a master data that was key to select any vendors for materials that were purchased. And the source list is no longer the leading master data for the source determination. Rather than that, we have the quote arrangement. That is the first master data that is considered. So if you have a quote arrangement distributing your replenishment proposals for different vendors and production versions, it will have the highest priority. In second place, we have a scheduling agreement. So if you have a scheduling agreement, MRP will automatically consider it as a valid source of supply. Then we have a purchasing contract. If you have a purchasing contract with your vendor, MRP will automatically select it. And finally, we have the info record. A new flag was introduced in the info record where you can mark that a source of supply, a vendor, should be selected by MRP. The source list can still be used to prioritize a specific source of supply, but it is not the leading master data anymore. So the simplification has another impact for materials that are produced internally that is related to the production version. So if you are producing a material internally in ECC, you had an option, a field in the material master where you could choose whether the bomb should be exposed based on the date or based on the production version. But now in S4HANA, the production version is mandatory. What does it mean? You need to create production versions for all your materials before migration to S4HANA. That includes phantom assemblies and also includes materials that are under a subcontracting process. So whenever you want your BOM to be exploded in a planned order or on a subcontracting purchase requisition, you need to have a production version. SAP also provided a report, a conversion report to be used in this case. This is the report CS BOM Prodver Migration 02 that is listed here. You can see a screenshot of this report here. And with this report, you can automatically select all your BOMs and routings, and system will generate a valid production version for everything. So you don't need to create like a conversion program or anything to generate production versions. So with HANA, we had a new database, and it's not a very simple database. There's a major paradigm change when we compare HANA with the traditional databases. HANA is a columnar database. HANA is an in-memory database. What does it mean? It means that the performance of the MRP transactions could be improved a lot. You will hear me saying classic MRP. So basically, whatever was available in MRP before S4HANA, before MRP Live, we call classic MRP. So the old transactions, MD01, MD02, MD03, that were basically ABAP based are now called classic MRP. And the new MRP is called MRP Live. So in S4HANA, the classic MRP transactions were improved. All these transactions that you see here highlighted in green, MD01, MD40, MD02. And basically all the ABAP code that was executed to read the planning elements from the database was pushed down into the HANA database layer. The major impact is that a few bodies, especially MD change MRP data that is very frequently used to make changes in an MRP element, these bodies will no longer be called. They need to replace by an additional body called MD add elements. This measure was basically to improve the performance by pushing down the code into the HANA database layer. We could improve the MRP performance a lot when reading information from the database. MRP needs to read all the planning elements, all the purchase requisitions, purchase orders, reservations, production orders, and everything for all the materials. So it takes a long time selecting information from the database. And with this simplification, with this new performance improvement, we were able to improve the performance of MRP when reading information from the database. Besides the classic MRP performance improvements, we have a new MRP available in S4HANA. It's called MRP Live, and it runs a totally in-memory planning run. What does it mean? It means that all the MRP code that was executed in ABAP was pushed down into the HANA database layer. So not only the sections where we read the information from the database, but all the MRP logic from the net requirements calculation, the lot sizing calculation, the scheduling, everything is executed in HANA. MRP Live basically improves the MRP performance a lot. Some customers who already implemented MRP Live, who had a large set of data and performance issues in MRP, could reduce the MRP performance from a few hours to 30 minutes, sometimes even less. MRP Live was designed to process a large chunk of data. There are a few exceptions that are some very specific scenarios. For example, the optimal lot sizing procedures are still not available in MRP Live. That means they cannot there are no stored procedures to process these settings. But when one of the situations is found, MRP Live would automatically call the ABAP code to process these materials. So it will automatically run the ABAP code. You don't need to schedule 2 different MRP runs. There are a few limitations. MRP Live will not generate, for example, MRP lists, and MRP Live uses a new set of bodies called AMDP bodies. So if you have any custom code, you need to convert it to MRP Live. But it's as a general rule, MRP Live has some advantages such as the performance, the ability to process PPDS materials, as we'll see later. And it is the target architecture defined by SAP. Classic MRP transactions are still available in S4HANA. You can still use it, but the recommended solution, the best practice, is MRP Live. So it was not only the new MRP Live. We had new we have new Fiori apps. So most customers complain about the user interface in ECC and R3 because we were using those old transactions that were not changed along the years. So with S4HANA, SAP delivered a new set of Fiori apps that is generally known as the MRP Cockpit. Here you can see some screenshots of these new Fiori apps. So you have information about shorters, you have colors, you have charts, and you have different apps for each one of the roles that need to process. For example, a planner that just works with raw material has a specific app where he can see the internal requirements. A planner that works with finished products can see the shorters caused by sales orders, and you have a general app that is pretty similar to MDO4. This is one slide with one additional details of these apps. Here you are seeing these apps in the old Fiori 1.0. So this is the monitor material shortage app. You can see a list of materials. You have charts with colors showing when you will have a shortage for your material. If you drill down into one specific material, you will see something like the stock requirements list. And for materials that are purchased, you also see suggestions of new replenishment proposals that will cover the shortage or changes into existing replenishment proposals. Finally, you also have the charts, and you can even carry out simulations where you will run these changes and simulate and see the chart how it's going to affect your material requirements situation. Just some highlights of the renovated user interface with Fiori 2.0. So you can see the filter bar has been improved, full screen, more columns, more lines, and options to configure the chart. This is the monitor material coverage app where we introduced later the individual segment that was not present in the first release. So support make to order, make to project, and direct procurement. This is a comparison of the chart in Fiori 1.0 and Fiori 2.0. So you have lots of new Fiori apps, a brand new user interface that a planner can use. Now we will go to so in 1610, the major new feature is not exactly MRP, but is PPDS. SAP had a separated planning system called APO. APO run in a specific database called Live Cache, and Live Cache was could support some complex algorithms that SAP didn't want to run in the ERP because it would consume too much of the system resources. And with S4HANA, with the HANA database, Live Cache was pushed down into the HANA database, and SAP could embed the PPDS into the SAP S4HANA layer. So now we have everything in the same system. Instead of implementing APO, you implement S4HANA and you have access to PPDS. PPDS has some advanced planning scenarios that are not supported by SAP, by MRP. For example, it can plan using shelf life data, batch shelf life. So if your batches will expire PPDS can plan considering this constraint. PPDS can also plan using capacity restrictions. So if you have capacity restrictions in your work center, PPDS will plan accordingly. The major change that we had in MRP was that PPDS was brought into the core, and the new MRP Live is now capable of planning PPDS advanced materials as well. So when you create a material master, besides the classic MRP tabs, MRP 1, 2, 3, and 4, you have the new advanced planning tab, where you can mark your material to be planned with PPDS. You mark it as an advanced planning material, and you can define a default heuristic to be planned, and MRP Live will plan the PPDS materials. So back in ECC, you had two different systems. You need to coordinate batches between those two different systems. You need to coordinate an interface to transfer data from ECC to PPDS and from PPDS to ECC. Now in S/4HANA, you have everything in the same system, and everything being planned by a single batch job, that is the MRP Live. So MRP Live, as this figure shows, can support the classic MRP mode. That means those restrictions where a material cannot be planned with a stored procedure, the new mode that is improved for performance, and PPDS that supports advanced algorithms. That was the major innovation that we had in release 16.10. Going to 1709. 1709, we had the new DD MRP. So we'll have another session about DD MRP especially. I'm just going to show some highlights about this. Traditional MRP had some issues. For example, whenever you make a change into demand of a finished product, this change gets reflected in the lower level materials, and you might have hundreds of exceptions, a lot of noise for your lower level products. Also, the idea is that MRP traditionally runs with a forecast as an input, but this forecast is usually wrong, even though you can hit the higher numbers, the aggregated figures for a forecast. When you disaggregate this forecast for the different finished products, you'll have a little bit more quantity sold than forecasted for one material. For other material, have more forecast and sales. So this forecast tends to be wrong. The idea of this new DD-MRP is to establish some buffers, some stock buffers, to position some buffers in your product structure, and this buffer will basically protect your lower level materials from the changes that will happen in the finished products. So the idea is that whenever you make a change in your finished product, it will not affect your low level product. It will not generate so many exceptions, as you will have this buffer to absorb the changes. So there are 5 steps. The first one is the setup, is to classify your materials and to position a buffer for your materials. The second one is the buffer level management. As you can see in the corner, we have the zones. The green zone is the maximum stock level, the yellow zone is the reorder point, and the red zone is the safety stock. The blue is whatever is above this the maximum stock level. That is usually not necessary. And the DD-MRP will basically, based on your average daily utilization of your material, will automatically calculate these buffer levels for you. Third step is the replenishment planning, where you will basically run MRP, generate planned orders, and coordinate these planned orders. The fourth is the replenishment execution, where you're going to turn these planned orders into production orders or requisitions into purchase orders and execute the replenishment. And the fifth step is the analytics, where you're going to see if your buffer is correctly fulfilling all your demand. The idea of the DMRP is that it will also reduce your lead time, since your total lead time will no longer be the total lead time to procure all your raw materials, semi-finished products, and finished products. and it will be what we call the couple lead time. That is the lead time from your finished product till the next buffer. Here you can see in color the stock buffers positioned. And for all the materials that we don't have a buffer, we will run traditional MRP or what we call a local MRP, and they will plan it with the traditional deterministic MRP as we used to do in the past. So it's not completely replacing MRP, it's a new philosophy on top of the old MRP. So we have this new set of Fiori apps, this DDMRP Fiori apps. This is the set of Fiori apps that we have in release 1709. So we basically have the schedule product classification where we'll classify our products, the schedule lead time classification of products where we'll classify according to the lead time, the buffer proposal calculation where we are going to calculate the buffer, and the replenishment planning and execution. Even though the whole solution was already there in 1709, it's a little bit limited. And as you will see, we had improvements coming on in the next release. So as for HANA 1809, additional improvements for the DMRP and one feature that was requested by many of our customers. So as we saw in the beginning of this presentation, in S/4HANA 1511, we had major simplifications implemented. And these major simplifications basically forced most of our customers to use MRP areas for subcontracting and for storage location planning. Most of the customers complained when they had to use MRP areas, the lack of visibility of the planning and the stock requirement situation in a single screen. While in SAP ECC, you have this separated storage location segments showing in transaction MD04 and this subcontracting stock segment and the storage location. You didn't have anything for the MRP area. You had to access the transaction 2 different times, one for the plant and one for the MRP area. And if you have multiple MRP areas, you need to access it several times. So SAP heard the feedback from our customers, and it introduced a new intra-plant view. What does it mean? It means that now in S/4HANA, as of S/4HANA 1809, we have one single screen where we can see all the storage location and subcontracting MRP areas combined in a design that is very similar to what we used to have in ECC. So these blue lines that you see here are the storage location, are the storage locations for which we have MRP areas, and we can see them all combined in the single screen. This is an improvement that we had in 1809 based on the customer's feedback. We had additional Fiori apps being delivered for the DMRP in S/4HANA 1809. We have a new buffer positioning Fiori app where we will be able to select the materials for which we want to run the DMRP. We have the buffer profile maintenance, the planner overview, and we have improvements for the Fiori apps that are highlighted in yellow. So now we have a complete solution for the DMRP, including the buffer positioning and the analytics. Here I would like to show some screenshots of these new Fiori apps that were delivered in 1809. Here is, for example, the buffer positioning, the new buffer positioning Fiori app, where you can have the system calculating the decouple lead time, or you can decide to buffer or unbuffer a material. When I say buffer or unbuffer, I'm basically saying that I'm going to add a DDMRP MRP type for my material. So when I say that I'm buffering a material, I'm basically selecting the MRP type D1. That is the MRP type that is used for DDMRP. There's a new MRP procedure for DDMRP in S/4HANA. These are the details of one specific material. So in the previous screenshot, I had the complete list of materials where I can buffer or unbuffer. And if I select one of these materials in this Fiori app, I can see the whole product structure, where I can highlighted materials that have the DDMRP buffer, and I can see for which materials it makes sense for me according to the classification or according to any additional details that I want. For example, if it's a critical semi-finished product that is used by many finished products, or if it has too many components that I need to buffer. And here I can buffer or unbuffer my material. This is the buffer sizing Fiori app. So after I run the buffer calculation, it will be shown here. So in S/4HANA 1709, we basically had just a buffer. I didn't have the historical. So the charts that you will see here, they are changing according to the different buffer calculations. I also have charts showing the average daily usage. That is the key, the fundamental calculation of the DMRP buffers. And I can, after I run the background job to calculate the buffers for me, I have the options to adopt or to discard the buffer that was calculated by the system. So the app itself was already available in 1709, but there are improvements in 1809. Here are some additional details about the DDMRP planning Fiori app. So we can see it's now similar to transaction MD04, the stock requirements list. I can see the supply and demand list. I can see the planned orders that were created. And I also have the option to see my buffer and to drill down and see additional details about my buffer. Here are details about the demand-driven execution Fiori app. For example, if there is one planned order that is late, I have the option to select this planned order and change the availability date, or if I need, I can automatically call the MRP controller, and there's a native integration with Skype. So from the Fiori, I can open the Skype and contact the MRP controller, for example. Here are details about the planning overview pages. That is basically the analytical Fiori app, where I'm going to coordinate all my buffers and all the details that I should have. So we have solution cards for the buffer level management. We have a solution card for replenishment planning, where I will see materials where are below the reorder point, below the safety stock. And I also have a different Fiori app where I have a different solution card where I see the replenishment execution, where again I can see what is below the safety stock and the on-hand alert threshold. Okay. Now, going to the latest release, S/4HANA 1709. First of all, in S/4HANA 1709, we have something called the Situation Handling Framework. What is the Situation Handling Framework? It is used by many different application areas, and using this framework, we can show, we can bring the user's attention to any important message that will happen for which the users need to take some action or need to be informed. As of S/4HANA 1909, we have the new a new option to manage the MRP situations. And with this MRP situations, we basically run a Fiori app that schedules a background job that will collect the situations that happen during the MRP run. And with this MRP situations, we will be able to show some notifications that will appear in the user interface. For example, when I have a material that has a replenishment proposal that should be canceled, for example, if there's a PO that is no longer needed, MRP generates exception message 20, and the MRP controller can be informed about this with a notification in the Fiori Launchpad. The same happens if I have excess stock for my material. In S/4HANA, we also have the new Predictive MRP. That's the major new feature that we have in S/4HANA 1909. So we can say that Predictive MRP is the successor of the long-term planning. In ECC, we had a feature called the long-term planning that was basically used for simulations. And this PMRP is the successor of S4HANA, of LTP in S4HANA. LTP is still available in S4HANA, but is no longer defined as a target architecture. There was no performance improvement for LTP or anything like that. So this PMRP integrates with Demand-Driven MRP. You can use a product forecasting and verify if it's viable to produce. You can identify capacity issues, and it can be used for purchasing to renegotiate contracts or to check if your suppliers have enough capacity to fulfill your demand. This is the process. So you will define what are the top level materials, the finished products that you will execute PMRP. You'll generate a forecast for those materials. You will create a simulation, and this simulation will basically run a simulated MRP for all the materials. It's a simplified MRP, so everything will be with the exact lot sizing procedure and MRP type PD. You will see the results and you will evaluate, defining if you have enough capacity, and you can make simulations changing the sources of supply, as we will see later. Finally, you're going to release your forecast, the changes that you made into your forecast. Let's see a step-by-step execution of PMRP in S/4HANA. So everything started with the creation of planet independent requirements. So you create a forecast for your material. After creating the forecast, you will create your simulation. That means you will define which finished products you want to run the simulation for. You define a simulation ID, an ID for the reference plan. You can define which specific independent requirement. For example, you can work with inactive independent requirements, for example, if it's an independent requirement that you just want to use for the simulation, and you schedule the creation. After you schedule the creation, you go to a different Fiori app where you're going to process the simulations. So here you will see in the first screen a list of all the available simulations. And you can see the simulation status. You can see if you have capacity issues already identified for the simulation. And from this app, you can, from this initial screen, you can automatically release your simulation. That means I'm going to release the changes that I made to my forecast within the simulation, or I'm going to release as it is. Or I can select one simulation and drill down to see the results. Here's where we have the interesting features about PMRP. So for example, if I have, here I have a forecast that is divided into weeks. And for example, if I have a capacity issue for one of the weeks, it will be highlighted in red. So you see lots of cells here highlighted in red because we have many capacity issues for my material. System will automatically tell me where is this capacity overload, and I can run the capacity plan simulation here. And here I'm going to see all my work centers, and I can see exactly on which weeks I have capacity overload in my work centers. From here, I can change the work center available capacity. This is for simulation purposes only, so this change is not adopted when I change my available capacity. I can change any forecasted quantity for my material. I can adjust the forecasted quantity to avoid the issue. Or I can go to the multi-level material simulation. If the issue is with a semi-finished product, I can change the source of supply, selecting a different production version for my material. Or I can pre-produce. That means I can produce my material in an earliest date so that I can fulfill my forecast, avoiding the capacity issues. Finally, after I made all the changes, I'm going to release my component forecast to the and these changes will be implemented to the forecast that I created, to the independent requirements. Just to close this presentation, besides the new PMRP, we have also improvements for Demand-Driven MRP in S/4HANA 1909. So we have the option to suspend the buffer proposal calculation for a material when we know that the average daily usage is not realistic. For example, if I'm introducing a new product, I can suspend the calculation and manually define the buffer. Demand-Driven MRP is also integrated with PMRP, so I can generate my independent requirements for my material. And if I'm using PMRP, I can adjust the quantity and I can release PIRs for my demand-driven products if I know that, for example, I'm going to have a peak in my demand in the following months, in the following periods. And this is the average forward-looking average daily usage. So the average daily usage calculation that happens in DDMRP can also look and find independent requirements. It's not only looking into the planned independent requirement in the average daily usage. That means the DMRP will not only look in the past consumption to calculate the buffer, but also in the planned independent requirements. So very quickly through the roadmap for the future. This is the roadmap that has been officially published by SAP. You can follow this roadmap in roadmaps.sap.com. So what is the plan for 2020? We had just the first release of PMRP, and SAP is planning to provide additional improvements for PMRP. What can we expect? So the product direction for 2021 is to enable the supplier collaboration. We saw that in the slides that PMRP is very focused in capacity issues, but we also have issues with my vendors. And PMRP, we hope that in the future it can also help us to work with our vendors, identify material component issues, and help us to resolve those issues. And the product vision for the future, it means after 2022, it's that we'll be able to simulate the impact of master data changes on production planning with PMRP. So if you have a change in the BOM, a change in the routing, you will be able to simulate it with a PMRP. Just to close, if you want to read more about MRP and the new features, I'm just finishing a book that will be available in July. It will be published by SAP Press, and it will be available in July. So if you want to see all the features mentioned here, will be available. Thank you all. I appreciate your support and I appreciate that you joined this live.
Thank you, Caetano. Actually, that's a really good session. So actually, I have only one question to you, which is asked by Piyush. So his question states like whether PMRP can be transferred to operative planning or not. His question is.
The only thing that we have until now is the transference of independent requirements. That means you generate a forecast by means of independent requirements and use PMRP to validate if you will have enough capacity in your work centers, and you can make changes into your independent requirements, and these independent requirements will be transferred back to operational MRP. So PMRP runs like a simplified MRP with a simplified lot sizing procedure. It will just use lot sizing procedure EX. So it's usually not, it doesn't make sense to transfer this simplified MRP to the operational MRP. At this point, this feature is not available, and I don't think it will be available in the future. Any other question? So if we no longer have questions, thank you. I appreciate that you took time from your Saturday to join this session. And if you have any questions related to MRP, I'm always available in the SAP communities. I try to answer as many questions as I can every day. And thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Caetano. Actually, we are running a raffle. So, as part of OpenSAP reactivation program, so I have collected the names, and let me share my screen and run the wheel. So I'm sharing my screen and I'm running the wheel. So let's see who will be the thing. Yeah. Amit Gupta is the winner. So I will reach out to Amit Gupta. How you can collect your prize, I will be reaching out to Amit Gupta. So yeah. So thank you everyone. Thank you, Seattle. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.